They say the wisdom of God Almighty is beyond human understanding, but what if that wisdom unfolded right next door? In 1965, Iraq, a retired judge revealed a chilling tale in his memoirs, one that still sends shivers down spines. It's a story of faith, fate, and the unexplainable, centered around his humble neighbor, a man burdened with the weight of an entire family, his wife, 3 children, 2 sisters, and a widowed mother, all relying on his meager vegetable shop to survive. But what happened next is something that defies logic and reason, leaving even the most skeptical questioning the unseen forces that shape our lives. The judge says that every day when he returned home and sat in the garden by his door, he would listen to the sounds of the neighbors to his right and left. He would feel happy when the father of this family returned home. He says that when he saw him coming, it was as if he were one of his children. Why? He says that this father would return home every night carrying things with him. Sometimes he would bring meat, and other times he wouldn't bring meat, but would bring them fruits from the shop where he worked. You know how some fruits are about to spoil, meaning they are no longer suitable for sale. So he would bring them home, and his children and family would rejoice. His shop was small, barely providing him with a livelihood. He says that every night when he came, he would hear his children shouting with joy, laughing, and taking the food that their father brought, receiving him at the door. They would take the food, cook it, and so on, and he could smell the cooking. He says he would smell the aroma and feel happy with the family. He says that the houses back then were not like the houses we have now. Everything could be heard, and you could smell the cooking and food of your neighbors. To make a long story short, the judge says that they continued in this way for years, and every night he had a rendezvous with this family. They didn't know that he could hear them, and they didn't know anything about him. But he says that one day he heard the screams of this family, crying and wailing. He says he went out to see what was happening and why. He saw the security men present with a coffin containing a body. It was the father of this family. He says the wife was crying, the children were crying, the deceased sisters were crying, and his mother was crying because they depended on God Almighty and then on this man. He was the one who provided for them. They were destitute and had no one but this man. But he says that, glory be to God, from that day on, the family changed completely. After they took the coffin, people gathered in the street and contributed money to bury him. They gave the rest to the family to live on, but it was a very small amount. He says that after a day or 2 or 3, the money they had ran out. They had no one but their 15-year-old son, who hadn't finished his studies. They told him that there was no solution, that either they would die of hunger or he would take the reins, meaning he would take his father's place. And indeed, the next day, this boy left school, went to his father's shop, opened it, and began to earn a living as his father did. He continued in this way for 3 years. Every night he would come home carrying food, but not like the food his father used to bring because the father's capital was gone. The family became sad after the father's death, and the son, well, he tried, but he couldn't fill his father's place. Their situation changed, and the family became gloomy. After 3 years, the boy turned 18, and you know the Iraqi system with conscription and so on. They told him that they had requested his conscription, and he had to attend, or, you know, the penalties and imprisonment and so on. These matters are not taken lightly in some countries. The family consulted, the boy sat with his younger siblings, his mother, and his aunts. They asked him what they should do. They told him that there was no one else, that he had to join the army, and that God Almighty would not forsake them. Anyway, before they could say anything more, the military police came, took him, and sent him to a city other than the one where they lived to begin his training. During the training, the boy noticed one of the training officers noticed that the boy was present, but absent-minded. The boy was not himself. He was there physically, but his mind was wandering, always thinking about his family, his mother, his aunts, his younger siblings, who would provide for them. He knew his situation was difficult. The officer began to punish him every time he saw him not paying attention. Every time he saw him not paying attention, he saw that the boy didn't learn from the punishment. So he grabbed him and asked him what his story was, what was wrong with him, why he was not focused with them, why he was always thinking. He told him his story. The officer felt sorry for him and told him that he apologized because he hadn't expected that he was carrying the worries of the world on his shoulders. He informed his superiors and told them that this boy could not be put in the field with weapons, that it would be better for him and for them if he worked in the kitchen. They agreed, and he was transferred to the army kitchen and began working there. As for the family, after the boy left, their situation deteriorated further. The mother was forced to go to one of the real estate brokers and told him that she would mortgage their house to him for money so they could eat. He said there was no problem, but gave her a month's grace period. If she didn't return the money, he would take the house. He gave her 50 dinars, while the house was worth more than 450 dinars at that time. She said, "God bless you." He told her that he would only give her a month. There was a contract between them that if the money didn't reach him before the month, he would take the house. She said there was no problem. She had 2 children, one 10 years old and the other 7 years old. They were too young to work. She said that they were going to die anyway, so they should sell the house. She quickly sold the house, and the man gave her 400 dinars. She spent 29 days trying to complete the transfer procedures and the documents. The problem was why she was rushing day and night to transfer the house. The army had a system of substitution, meaning cash payment instead of conscription. If she wanted to get her son out of conscription, she would pay a cash substitute, which was worth about 100 dinars at that time. They gave them a month's grace period. If she didn't attend after the month, it would be impossible for her son to be released, and he would complete his military service for about 2 or 3 years. The problem was that the month's grace period was spent 29 days in the sale and transfer procedures, and only 1 day remained. She said that she would hopefully make it. The city was about 2.5 hours away from their city, about 250 kilometers. Indeed, she finished all her procedures in 29 days. With 1 day left, she immediately took the money, because she said that she would get her son out and he would work again and provide for them. There was no other solution. She took the house money, 400 dinars, and put it in her pocket to pay 100 dinars to the army. She went to the same square where the transportation cars gathered, the taxi rank. It was nighttime, and she had to arrive the next morning. You know, by the end of the morning, until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the day ends. So she had to leave now to arrive there tonight, so that in the morning she could go to the military headquarters and pay the cash substitute for her son. She went to the taxi rank and waited for a car to leave from this city to that city. She waited an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The world darkened, and it became night. The problem was that the taxis were not leaving alone. A driver needed 4 or 5 passengers to travel with them, or it wouldn't be worth it for him to take a single fare. So when she saw that there were no passengers traveling that night, she said to a taxi driver, "I will pay you the fare of 5 people, but please, I need you to take me now. Take me in the taxi alone." He said, "Okay, no problem. Get in." She got in with him. On the way, he asked her why she had paid for 5 people, why she was so desperate. The poor woman began to explain to him. She told him that her husband had died in a car accident on his way home, and that he was the sole provider for the family. She was forced to let her son drop out of school and go to work. Thank God, he worked for a year or 2 until he reached the age where they took him into the army. Now, she was forced to sell the house and take its money because they had no one but this son and young children who couldn't work. She said that tomorrow was the last day to submit the cash substitute for her son's conscription, which is why she was forced to take a taxi alone. When the taxi driver heard that the woman had 400 dinars with her, which at that time was like 4,000 dinars today, the devil began to play with his mind. You know, it was a dark road, and they were passing by a valley where no one lived. He thought he had to kill her and take the money. Indeed, he immediately stopped at this deep valley. She was stunned, not knowing what was happening. He stopped the car, opened the door for her, and pulled her out. She began to plead with him, saying, "For God's sake, for the sake of your parents, have mercy on me. I need you to take me to my son." The man had no mercy in his heart. He pulled her and threw her into the valley. He went down after her to make sure she was dead. She fell about 40 or 50 meters down into the valley. He went down after her to make sure she was dead. He saw her like a corpse. He went down, took the money she had with her, got back in the taxi, and drove away. After getting in the taxi, he was afraid to return to his city because they might discover the body. He thought that if he returned to his city now without any passengers, his friends at the taxi rank would find it strange because they had a system. Whoever left had to bring back passengers. So he continued to the city he was originally intending to go to, the city where her son was stationed. He went there, and in the morning returned from the city again, taking passengers with him back to his city. When he returned to his city, the organizers at the taxi rank asked him why he was late and why he had taken so long. He messed up his story because he was confused. He stayed longer in that city to compose himself and think about what to do. He decided to return again with passengers. They asked him why he was late. The time he spent from last night until today should have been enough for at least 2 or 3 trips, but he had only made 1 trip last night and 1 trip today. As a punishment, they told him to take a group of passengers to the same city he had come from. He agreed because he didn't want to argue with them and arouse suspicion. He said okay. He took the passengers. Pay attention to this. The woman was thrown last night, and he brought passengers from the city where her son was stationed and returned. Then the taxi organizers made him go back again to deliver passengers. While he was driving with the passengers, he stopped at the same place where he had thrown the woman last night, in the dark, in a deep valley full of wolves and predators. It was impossible to find anything of her, but glory be to God, the criminal always circles back to the scene of the crime. He said he just wanted to make sure. He suddenly stopped in the middle of the road at the valley and told the passengers that he needed to relieve himself. They told him to go, but not to be late. He went down about 30 or 40 meters until he reached the place where the woman's body was. Here was the shock. The woman was still alive, struggling for life. She had been there since last night, bleeding and weak, broken and covered in blood. He said to her, "You cursed woman, you're still alive?" He picked up a rock. But, glory be to God, the wisdom of the Lord of the worlds intervened. As soon as he lifted the rock, a snake appeared and bit him. It was a very poisonous viper. As soon as it bit him, he let out a loud, echoing scream in the valley that those in the taxi heard. They rushed to him. He fell. When the passengers in the taxi reached him, they found the taxi driver lying on the ground, and next to him was the woman he had thrown there last night and whose money he had taken. They took the taxi driver and the woman and rushed them to the hospital. After they arrived at the hospital, the taxi driver died. They were able to save the woman. She had fractures and internal bleeding, but the viper's bite was so poisonous that they couldn't save him. After she regained consciousness, while she was still struggling for life, she seemed to have a superhuman strength, just so she could tell them the story of what had happened to her. They had taken her to the nearest hospital, which was near the camp where her son was training. As soon as she woke up, she told the investigators who were present her story with the taxi driver, what he had done to her, and how he had returned the next day to make sure and was bitten by the viper. The investigators searched the taxi driver's pocket and found the bundle of money. She told them that today was the last day for submitting the cash substitute for her son. They told her there was no problem since she had been through this. They summoned her son from the camp, he came, they gave him the money, and he completed the substitution process and was released. God saved the woman. Her son took her back to their city. After returning to the city, The son used the money from selling the house to open a large shop. He began to earn a living again, having previous experience in selling vegetables. He felt life anew. God blessed him, and he became one of the biggest merchants in his city. His younger brother completed his studies. One of them, the eldest, became an engineer, the one below him became a doctor, and the youngest became an officer in the army. In addition, the engineer's business expanded greatly, and he became one of the biggest merchants. The judge continued in his memoirs about the story. He said that after God Almighty saved the woman, he went and asked her what she felt when she was thrown into the valley and left in a deep valley full of animals and predators. She said, "When he threw me, I fell and was injured. At first, I fainted. But when I woke up and saw the frightening surroundings and heard the sounds of wolves and other terrifying things, I didn't care about any of it. My only concern was my son, whose deadline to be released from conscription was tomorrow." Look at the heart of a mother. She said she was broken and bleeding, but her thoughts were with her son. She raised her hands to God Almighty and said, "O Lord, you know my story with my son, and you know that I have no one but you, and then this son. O Lord, save me and bring me my son." She said she then fainted again and woke up the next morning. In the morning, the same taxi driver came to her. When he came down and saw her, he said, "You cursed woman, you're still alive?" She said she surrendered and waited for him to stab her or kill her. Look at the arrangement of the Lord of the worlds in this amazing story. Why didn't anyone see her from the people leaving the city where her son was stationed and going to the woman's city? Why didn't anyone see her and take her with them? Because God Almighty had decreed that she would go to the city where her son was. He left her until the next day so that the same taxi driver would come and make sure and take her with him in a way to the city she wanted to go to in order to get her son out. This is one point. Another point, God Almighty's arrangement is amazing. Why did he make those who organized the taxis force this person to return early in the morning to the city he was heading to yesterday, the city because of which he threw the woman in the valley, just so that the man would return to check on the woman before she died? How did God Almighty create the curiosity in him to go and check on her and find her not dead? So he picked up the rock to kill her, and the snake bit him. The end of the story is the response of the Lord of the worlds to the prayer of the wronged woman who was in the darkness of the deep valley, broken, bleeding, and crying for her son. See how God Almighty saved her, killed her killer, and saved her. This is the end of our story. If you like the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. May God not disgrace you. Goodbye.